Hello and welcome to Tête à Tête, France 24's flagship interview show. Our guest this week is Chris Sidoti. He is one of the 3 members of the United Nations Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory and Israel, and he joins us from Geneva. Thank you very much, Mr. Sidoti.
Good day and thank you.
On September 16, just a few days ago, your commission, which was established back in 2021, issued its legal analysis of what was happening in Gaza and concluded that Israel was committing the crime of genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza. Back in March, you issued a report in which you didn't go as far. What has changed since then?
What has changed for us is the accumulation of evidence. This is the 8th report that we have issued that deals with events in southern Israel and Gaza since 7 October 2023. And our approach has been a legal approach, the kind of legal methodology that is used by legal bodies. We started by collecting information. We analysed it, having had so much evidence. We formed conclusions about different parts of the situation. And our reports reflect this. We looked at education, we looked at healthcare, we looked at cultural sites, including archaeological sites. We examined the killings, the treatment of hostages and the treatment of Palestinian prisoners, and so on. And it's as though we've been putting together the big picture of what is happening. When we have looked at individual areas, we came to conclusions that crimes against humanity and war crimes were being committed. But now we have looked comprehensively at the totality of the situation and examined it in the context of the law of genocide. And we came to the conclusion, not a conclusion that at all we are happy with, but we came to the conclusion that since 7 October 2023, the actions of the Israeli forces in Gaza have constituted genocide.
So you are accusing Israel of committing 4 of the 5 genocidal acts under the 1948 UN Convention. Obviously, you're saying your work is evidence-based, and you are a veteran, if I may say, in that field. What kind of evidence did you gather and really change your mind and probably maybe even caught your attention?
The evidence that we gathered falls into a number of different categories, but it is very strongly based on eyewitness evidence. So that's not the only evidence, but we spoke to a large number of people who could give eyewitness accounts of what was going on. So, of course, first and foremost, victims. The Israeli authorities would not let us enter Gaza, but we were able to speak to people who had been evacuated for medical reasons and those who were accompanying them. We were able to speak virtually, that is by telephone or through the internet, to those in Gaza who still have access to internet services. Importantly, we spoke to a large number of international humanitarian and medical people who had gone to Gaza and spent time there. So doctors, nurses, truck drivers, the providers for humanitarian assistance, staff of UN agencies. All of these people could provide first-hand eyewitness evidence of what they had seen and what they had experienced. That was supplemented by an enormous quantity of digital material, video evidence and photographic evidence. There has never been a war in which so much digital evidence has been available. These were posted, so far as the 7 October events in southern Israel were concerned, by Hamas fighters, boasting of what they were doing. And that's why we found war crimes in the Hamas activities in southern Israel. So far as Israeli actions in Gaza are concerned, Israeli military people themselves are posting an enormous quantity of information on the internet. We have the capacity to examine this digital material, determine whether it is valid or manufactured or even comes from different sites at different times, and then use it as an evidentiary basis. We have dealt as well with material coming from other organisations that have staff on the ground in Gaza. This is not primary evidence, this is secondary evidence, and it has less weight than the first-hand evidence of eyewitnesses and also digital evidence. But it makes an important contribution. So from the very beginning, Our methodology has complied with the United Nations procedures for organisations like ours, and we require corroboration. It's not just sufficient to talk to one witness unless there is some corroboration, for example, through digital evidence or satellite imagery. Our reports have always been based on our own investigations and our own conclusions. We don't adopt the conclusions of others. We don't accept the evidence of others unless we have checked it out and been able to corroborate it. And that's the important distinction between our report on this issue and that of other organisations. We base it exclusively on our own investigations and the conclusions that we have formed. We have been reporting on that progressively over the last 2.5 years, and now, as I say, we bring it together comprehensively in an examination of the Gaza events in relation to the law of genocide.
But genocide, it's not only documenting the crimes, it could be war crimes, crimes against humanity, it's intent. This is really a conclusion that you came to. Israel obviously says that this is because you're biased, you're just a proxy of Hamas, you're ignoring what Hamas did on October 7th and continues to do in Gaza. How did you establish intent from Israel to commit genocide?
There are two different aspects that through which we approach the issue of intent. You're quite right. Intent is the critical issue so far as genocide is concerned, and it's also the most difficult issue to establish. But first, of all the approaches, all the evidence we examined, the words coming out of the mouths of the Israeli leaders themselves condemn them. It's what they've been saying, the political leaders, the president, the prime minister, the defence minister, the national security minister, and so many others, indicating the purpose of their actions in Gaza, the military leaders as well. These are words coming out of their own mouths. It started on the 7th of October 2023, but it did not stop there. It's not as though these were in the heat of the moment comments that they were making after the very traumatic events for Israeli people on 7 October 2023. It started then, but it's continuing right up to today. And it's not just one or two Israeli leaders that are saying this. It's right across the Israeli elite, political and civil, and it is even found in the media reporting. So the first part of the evidence that we collected on the question of intent were the words that came from the mouths of the Israeli leaders. We discarded all those that came from people who were not in any position to command the troops. We looked at the chain of command from the top down and looked only at the words of those, or predominantly at the words of those whose comments and orders would be carried out by the next layer of command and then by soldiers on the ground. It was a thorough examination. What? Second, and independently of the statements, was the pattern of fighting that's taking place. The fighting has been intense from day one and again is continuing. It can no longer be said that the fighting is directed towards the freeing of hostages. This Israeli government has firstly shown very little interest in the hostages, and secondly, most hostages have been freed by negotiations, diplomacy. Barely a handful of hostages have been freed through military action. The intense bombardment, the total destruction of Gaza has been going on now for 2 years. And looking at that pattern of operations, the destructive, the scorched earth policy of the military provides circumstantial evidence that when we weighed up other possibilities, led us to the conclusion that the very high test in international law had been met. And that test says that this genocidal intent must be the only reasonable inference to be drawn from the conduct. And we concluded that that was the case.
Last question. What about the issue of complicity to commit genocide? Obviously, the 1948 Convention also talks about this. What do you make of this? Is this just a moral thing, or is it a legal obligation to prevent that?
It's a legal obligation. We haven't looked at the question of complicity in terms of whether other states are complicit in international law, that is, can be held responsible as states for supporting the Israeli action. That's a separate question, and it is one which in future the Commission of Inquiry may examine. But in terms of law, the most important, most pressing issue at the moment is that all states have an obligation to prevent genocide when there is a serious risk of genocide. The International Court of Justice, that the highest authority in the international legal system, said in January last year that there was a plausible risk of genocide in Gaza. And that finding by the court triggered the obligation lying on all states to act to prevent genocide. Some states have acted in response, others have not. And I have to say that the primary audience, the primary readership of our report for us is other states who have this international legal obligation to act to prevent and have not done so at all in some cases or adequately in others. So this week in Geneva, the chair of the inquiry, Navi Pillay, and I have been meeting with governments, representatives, diplomats, bilaterally and in joint groups to tell them, to remind them of their obligations under international law and to call for action to prevent the genocide that is continuing in Gaza. This is not just a past event. It's not as though it's over. It has to be prevented now because it is continuing.
Chris Sidoti, I want to thank you very much for being our guest here on France 24. And thank you all for watching Tête à Tête this week on France 24.